In today's episode, I sit down with Ryan Stramrood, extreme open water swimmer, performance mindset coach, inspirational speaker, and 3-time Guinness World Record holder. Ryan has pushed himself to the edge in some of the world's most extreme waters, from swimming in -1 degree waters in Antarctica to completing the first ever swim around Cape Horn. In this conversation, we dive into the paradox of comfort zones, the mental barriers that hold us back, and the strategies you can use to push past fear and unlock your potential. If you enjoy conversations like this and want to hear more, make sure to subscribe to the podcast on YouTube and follow me on Instagram at @KoaBrown, where I share behind-the-scenes clips, extra content, and updates on upcoming episodes. For the people listening who might not be familiar with you, how would you describe what it is you do?
What I do is obviously on a couple of levels, but essentially if I'm standing in front of an audience, then I'm an ultra extreme open water and ice swimming adventurer, an inspirational speaker, and a peak performance coach. That sounds very grand, which is pretty much what I do full time now on the inspirational speaking side. I've done a lot before. I've run advertising, sales house. I've been involved in a business in the UK that just exited last year in the AI field. And this year is the first year that I am 100% an inspirational speaker.
Okay. You mentioned you were involved in a business within AI.
Yeah.
When was this?
This was now, it exited in August last year.
Oh, okay.
And it's got a long backstory. Through my advertising sales business I met an entrepreneur from the UK who started a media business in South Africa and hired me or my business contracted us to work with him. And we did really, really well and shot the lights out. And while I was driving him around from meeting to meeting, he was talking about, this is about 16, 17 years ago. Yeah. He was talking about another business he wants to start, which I didn't understand at all, but it eventually led to the AI space. But 17 years ago, no one knew what that was. And I just backed him so much that I invested in his idea, which is not a clever thing to
invested in back then.
Back then,
oh,
yeah,
okay.
on a handshake and an email, and then kind of forgot about it because it morphed a million times, and I presumed it was dead. And then I was keynoting in the UK, and he saw I was there via my LinkedIn feed, and he looked me up and said, "Hey, listen, the business that you own a share of now looks like this. And we're looking for a head of business development, partnerships, and growth. Are you interested?" And I was like, "No, because I'm an inspirational speaker, and that's what I'm interested in." And he said, "Well, you work on your time, Slack, nice pound-based salary." And off we went. It was an incredible experience. I worked for 18 months, and then they did their exit to a massive US corporate. It was unfortunately my day job in terms of the AI ended, but a nice little handshake for my investment made many years ago. So
yeah,
it all feels good. So
smart decision back then.
Yeah, well, lucky decision.
Yeah.
Well, maybe there was a bit of smarts. It's about backing the right people and making good character choices, and this was definitely a win.
Yeah. I also, I read that, in your book as well, before this, inspirational speaking, extreme sports, you were actually, a business owner yourself, which you just mentioned now. Yeah. How did you make the transition from business owner with no, sporting background to to breaking world records essentially? How did that transition happen?
Yeah, it's certainly not overnight, but it is quite an interesting part of what I express to audiences. So, But at the age of 29, bordering on 30, I had done absolutely nothing in the sporting realm whatsoever. I was running my business, had a family, doing really well, in that space.
Yeah.
But never backing myself. I've always been kind of sporty, but never, I'm not gifted at anything to do with sport whatsoever, fairly coordinated. And I've always enjoyed swimming. And how this story happened, or how the transition started, was I was starting to get a bit frustrated because I was working hard and then loving the television and the TV remote and bag of chips, getting fat and lazy. And I took an advertising client away for a weekend, a gentleman called Grant Fraser. And we were sitting on the patio or the stoep, having a beer, and I was moaning about how fat I'm getting. And he said, "Well, hey, why don't you join my little swimming squad that I go to back in Cape Town?" And, it's one of those moments, he's a client, so you kind of nod and say, "Yes, I'll definitely join." Then all of a sudden Monday morning comes and you're like, "Oh, did I really commit to this?" And off I went. And the way it works when you go to a swimming squad, for those who don't know, generally, and there's a coach there, and generally there are a whole bunch of lanes, and there's the slow lane and the slightly faster lane and the medium lane and then the fast lane and then the very fast lane. And the coach doesn't know you, so he says, well, choose your lane where you're going to get in. Now, I don't know, so I got in the fast lane, of course, and did my first 20 lengths. You always feel very bulletproof in those first 4 or 5 lengths, and then realized I was in deep trouble. And managed 20 lengths before I had to go with my tail between the legs and vomit around the corner because I just pushed too hard. Because you set off at a pace. Now there's someone behind you, right? You can't let them catch you, and you can't fall behind, and you certainly don't want to be lapped. So it becomes a big ego thing. But on that day, as much as I hated that, on that day I met somebody who was in that same lane as me, who had swum from Robben Island to Bloberg. Now, in those days, and this is 20 years ago, right? That to me was the most incredible thing. I was so starstruck by this person because I only ever read about these people in the newspaper, and these guys who swim in their speedos in that cold water all the way across, and it just was a concept I couldn't really understand. And it got me coming back, and I went back to this little swim squad and slowly got a little bit better. Before this said gentleman, a guy called Rudy Kaiser, might as well give him a name. He challenged me to do a Robben Island crossing as well.
On that first day?
No, he didn't challenge me on the first day because I was too busy vomiting around the corner in shame. But when he saw me coming back a few times and getting some consistency, him and another gentleman called Tony Salme, who's a legend of the sport, challenged me to do it. And it was like almost a punch in the gut to how it was unheard of. I'm not an elite sportsman. That's for people better than me, was my mindset.
Yeah. And it's open water. It's in the middle of the ocean.
Open water. It's 7.5 kilometers. It's cold. If you want to do it the way you meant to do it, it has to be in a Speedo, goggles and cap, no wetsuit or anything like that, because the challenge is the cold, which I'm sure we'll talk about a little bit more. Long story short, I ended up setting it as a goal. 6 months later, I got in and I succeeded on my first attempt.
So, sorry, go ahead.
Well, it just sent me on a bit of a mindset trip, because for all these years, I'd been doubting myself. I had pedestaled the people who did that stuff. Now I've just done it. And it's triggered something in me as to where else do I sell myself short.
Yeah.
And initially it was just in the sporting realms or in the sporting field and swimming. But it made me think a lot harder about other areas of my life. And that's kind of the long tail journey that I've been on. It's not just pushing myself in sport. It's how you take those lessons, which I now tell around the world, and you apply it to other areas of your life.
Going back to that first swim, what was it? First of all, did you swim with them? So they challenged you to that swim. Were they there with you, or did you go alone?
No, I went. Actually, you meant to do it alone. They weren't involved at all.
Okay.
But actually, the way that swim happened, there was a young girl doing a challenge. She'd been training for it for a long time.
Yeah.
And I was invited to be on the boat with her and just to jump in the water and familiarize myself, because it gets quite daunting out there in the deep. And so I wasn't 100% ready, but I ended up getting in with her, and I swam all the way to the beach with her because I just felt good, and it just happened.
Yeah.
So I wasn't alone in the water. There was someone else, but it was probably a few weeks before I planned to do it.
Was it harder than you thought it would be? Was it easier than you thought it would be?
Well, here's the thing, and this is probably the first time we're touching on mindset stuff. I was so nervous and so prepared and so in the game and so determined that it turned out to be a lot easier than I thought. It's still a hard swim. The cold gets inside you. Your body reacts in ways that you've never imagined because you've never been there before. And it's quite a mind boggle to try and overcome that and still perform for a long time in that cold water. So there were huge challenges, but I handled it way better than I thought I would handle it. And why I say this is the first tap into a mindset conversation is because probably about 3 months later, my sister decided that she would like to do Robben Island. And she did all the training in the background and phoned me up saying, hey, the weather's great. She's got the boat, everything organized. Do I want to swim with her? And now, feeling like the little bit of the bulletproof hero who's already done it, said, yeah, of course. And I took the day off work and I grabbed my Speedo and I went and I jumped in that water. And I wasn't in that same frame of mindset of this is my first time. This is going to be hard. I'm going to give it my all. Yeah. It was more of it's my sister's swim. And, I've done it before. I know I can do it. So I'm going to jump in. And it very nearly kicked my ass.
Wow.
Very, very nearly. And also I learned...
cold or the being so tired?
Just from a mindset point of view and not being in the right headspace and thinking it through before I got in. But also one of the most valuable lessons in my sport is that my sister, who's a brilliant swimmer, is just slightly slower than me in pace.
Okay.
And when you get in the cold water, you cannot swim at somebody else's slower pace. The cold gets inside you. It's very, very important that you swim at your own pace to keep your heat generation going so that the cold doesn't sink into your core. But swimming slowly with my sister, slower for me, allowed the cold to get in my core. So for the first hour, it was wonderful. I could do backstroke. I could look at the mountain. I could enjoy the scenery, which I didn't do on my first swim because I was so focused. But all of a sudden, an hour into that cold water, and it started to creep inside my core, and all the blood's drained from your muscles, so your arms are now uncoordinated, and you've lost power, and that's when things go terribly wrong in the cold.
Okay.
So that was.
But you made it.
I made it. Yeah,
and your sister made it as
sheer
well.
ego and not wanting to pull out and let my sister get it done. So thanks for the male testosterone gene.
Sibling rivalry there, yeah. What does the training look like for Robben Island Swim? Like for anyone listening to this who, I don't know, wants to get into it. I myself, for example, would love to try it out at some point in my life. What kind of training do I need to do to be able to complete it? Would it be more mental or physical or both?
Yeah, a little bit of both. So it's firstly, it's a fantastic goal. So many people are doing it now. They've also opened up the wetsuit category, but we'll talk a little bit about that. So I don't advocate that up front. Anyway, I'll tell you why. Not that I diss it and do it however you want, but the challenge of a Robben Island is the cold water. It's not the distance. So as long as you've got a little bit of discipline and you've got access to a swimming pool and water, you can get the fitness you need to do a Robben Island swim. And to answer you more directly, the swim is it's 7.3 Ks. Let's just call it 8 because you're never going to swim in a perfectly straight line. So you're going to swim about 8 kilometers or just short. You need to, the very rule of thumb is you need to be doing 8 kilometers a week minimum to be able to swim a straight stretch of 8 Ks. And you need to do that for a couple of months, depending on what your starting base of fitness is. I don't recommend you just do 8 because throw in a little bit of wind and chop and an opposing current, and all of a sudden those 8 Ks become a lot harder. So I always say absolute minimum, you need to be doing 10 kilometers a week, preferably 12, gives you a little bit of a buffer. And you can do it all essentially, but I wouldn't do that. If you live in Cape Town, you've got the privilege of getting into the cold water in Camps Bay and Clifton and Blouberg, wherever you stay. Because swimming, doing all your training in a Virgin Active swimming pool, which is such a controlled environment and boiling hot water at 28 degrees, it's not like that in the ocean. It is very different. So that's where you do all your training and you never get in the sea. You're going to be in for a big shock when you bump into that first blue bottle or jellyfish that stings the hell out of you, and something swims below you and you see that dark shadow, and then the wind comes up and the waves are bashing in your face, and you're going to have an interesting time. So I say at least try and get 20% of your time in the ocean. There are lots of little swimming groups that you can join on the weekend dotted around the peninsula. And you go and you figure out, most importantly, how your body performs with the element of cold. Okay, it's very different to how it's going to perform in a Virgin Active swimming pool. Because once, let me just tell you what happens. I don't want to get too technical, and I'm no medical guy, but essentially what happens when you get into cold water, your blood rushes away from your extremities, so not just fingers and toes, talking biceps, calves, thighs. That blood rushes out of those extremities into your center core to keep your heart nice and healthy and active and alive, pumping blood to the brain. So that's vitally important. You can live without arms and legs, but not so much a heart that pumps blood to the brain. So that starts to happen, which impacts those muscles, which makes them weaker, which changes your stroke. And you need to understand, your body needs to understand, and your mind needs to understand, what that's going to feel like. And you need to start working on little mental ways of keeping that cold out as long as possible. You need to understand what pace you need to swim at to try and create a little barrier.
Unique, entirely unique.
Everyone's unique. It has a lot to do with body weight as well.
Oh, really?
So if you're a really thin, I mean, the poor triathletes, when Ironman comes around, then all of a sudden the pools are filled with the Iron men and ladies who come to get their swimming fitness. But even though they all wear wetsuits, every now and then they join our little swimming squads down in Camp Spain Cliff, and it's quite, they've got not an ounce of body fat on them, and that cold just goes straight in, and it really, we've had some very, very dangerous scenarios. But if you're like me, you got a little bit of chunk. It holds off the cold a lot better, and the more you got, the better. Okay, interesting. Yeah, I didn't realize that is a thing. Do people eat more to put on weight for these kinds of swims? Like Hell
specifically?
Yeah, it's great. That's why a lot of us do the sport. You can chow some pies and burgers, and that's your excuse.
Yeah.
No, look, obviously you're meant to eat healthy, but if you are doing a long cold swim, you're only helping yourself if you can pick up some weight in a healthy way. Because again, the challenge is not the distance, the challenge is the cold. And I think that's where I was going earlier, where I started the stories. So a lot of people do it in wetsuits, and a lot of people ask me, but why don't you just wear a wetsuit? And the answer is, the challenge is the cold. That's like doing the Cape Town cycle tour on an e-bike, essentially. Because anyone can do that distance. It's hard, it's long, you've got to train for it. But not anyone can do that distance with the impact of the cold on their body and on their mind. Okay, the cold messes with your mind. Us humans have not evolved well to handle cold. We've evolved very well to avoid it. So when we throw ourselves into the cold water, besides what's happening in our body, the mind is implementing pain, panic, and fear, and all these wonderful things that come together to make you, essentially to get you out, to take this unbelievably powerful tool of ours that is designed to keep us safe. And it knows that being in cold water is not a good place for you to be for long term. So all it's doing is trying very hard, very overzealously to get you out. And to try and perform through that, to try and understand that, to try and push yourself past that point of, I must get it out now, I'm too cold, is very hard.
But how do you know when it's too much? How do you know when the cold is actually too much?
It's an interesting question because you don't, and that is why you need to do lots of little swims, with the various groups. You get to know your own body. But to answer that question, there's a organization called Big Bay Events. Derek Fraser, I don't know if you've come across them. They're very well known, and they do, I'd say, 95% of the Robben Island crossings, where they have trained people on the support boat alongside you, who know what the symptoms of hypothermia are, who know what to look for. If your stroke count starts dropping, if you start slurring your speech, if your eye pupils start to dilate, they'll get you out that water really quickly. So that's a very important element. But it's also, in the early days when I started, they used to stop you and say, what's your name? You're like, Ryan, okay, you can keep swimming.
Yeah. It's a little bit more technical.
There's a little bit more to it than that. But you do start getting confused, and that when it starts setting in a little bit deeper.
Do you think, going back to that first Robben Island swim, if you didn't complete it, would you still be doing what you do today?
Sure, I don't know. It might have broken my confidence, and it would have been an interesting journey from there. I actually can't answer that. I've never thought about that. It was such a pivotal moment for me when I made it, and that it might well have been the opposite. I like to think that I would have trained a little harder and learnt from whatever caused me to fail the first time. And I have plenty failures under my belt since then, which I have learned from. So I think let me give myself the benefit of the doubt. I would have learned from what went wrong. I would have probably said, well, you weren't meant to swim today anyway. Patience is a virtue, and I'd like to think I would have done it again, and it would have just been another layer of armor.
Okay. Comfort zones, what do they mean to you, and why do you think people struggle so much with getting out of their comfort zones?
Brilliant question. And for the listeners who have heard the comfort zone story a million times before, it is probably one of the most important conversations. And I preach this around the world. And often when I start talking about comfort zones, you see, a few sighs in the audience because of, we've all heard the inspirational speaker talking about comfort zones. But when you really start to unpack a comfort zone and what it is, every single person has heard you must get out your comfort zone, and probably every single person you'll ask will say, yes, I've been out of my comfort zone, or I don't operate within a comfort zone. And I can guarantee you 99% of those who say that are very much in their comfort zones. Okay. And what I learned very early in my journey to some of this planet's most crazy places is that if you don't get outside your comfort zone, you cannot learn new stuff. And when you stop learning new stuff, you cannot grow. When you stop growing, you will get overtaken by those who are. It is as simple as that. Okay. And to get outside your comfort zone is one of the most difficult things. I also do coaching, and I sit with people quite often one-on-one, and often these are CEOs and real achievers, not always, but quite often. And I always say, right, for this quarter or this year, have you set yourself a proper goal? What's your goal? Always set this big ass goal. You say, okay, well, that's great to hear. And tell me what your goal is, and they'll tell me. And I said, and do you know how on earth you're going to achieve that? Oh, yeah, I know exactly how to achieve it. So I'm like, okay, tell me. And then they'll go, well, I'll do this, then I'll do that, then I'll do this, then I'll do this. And eventually I will reach that goal. And I'll say, so you've got a beautiful roadmap on exactly how to reach that goal. You know what to do. Yeah, I know what to do. I said, well, then you're in your comfort zone. That is the very definition. Your goal might look scary to everybody else, but you know how you're going to achieve it. You're not getting outside your comfort zone. Getting outside your comfort zone is when you set a goal that you don't think you can achieve. And you don't, sitting here today, know how you're going to get it, because you're going to have to be creative. You're going to have to put yourself out there. You're going to have to risk failure to achieve what you don't think you can achieve. And that is the difference. And usually there's a bit of annoyance at first, and then slowly it starts to sink in that it's absolutely right. If you're setting goals you can achieve, and I give this example very much myself, because a lot of people ask me what's next for me, and I've not that recently anymore, but about 3 years ago now, did a very big swim for me, which was got me a Guinness World Record, and it was hugely publicized, and I got lots of pats on the back, which I take. But if I'm deadly honest with everybody, as hard as that was, I knew if I did the training, if I got the team right, if I got the nutrition right, if I chose the right weather day, and if the stars aligned, I knew I would make it. So did I get out of my comfort zone for that? I don't think I did. I certainly wasn't comfortable. There's a difference between getting out of your comfort zone and being comfortable. I was not comfortable in this swim. It was 33 kilometers of tough water. Yeah. But what I don't know is, can I turn around and swim back through the night unprotected in some pretty darn scary waters? And that's what I would like to try and do. That's how I set goals. So that I know I can do. Mm-hmm. Doesn't mean I'm going to get it right. Doesn't mean I'm not going to fail.
Is this the English Channel?
No, I'm referencing False Bay at the moment. I'm trying not to give too much away because, but I would like to swim a double False Bay eventually. I've been talking about it for too long, but I don't have the time to train and the commitment just yet.
Has it been done before?
It has never been done before, no.
Okay. So you swim during the day, come back at night.
You'll look at currents and wind. You might swim first leg at night and come back in the day. It just depends on how you set it up. But either way, you will be swimming through the night, because it will be a good 20 to 28 hour swim.
Non-stop. You
climb out on the other side. You've got a maximum of 10 minutes before you got to be back in.
Wow.
To consider it a double. Yeah.
Okay. Coming back to comfort zones, just quickly, so you also mentioned there's a difference between being comfortable and, comfort zones. What are some practical ways people could get out of their comfort zones? Like maybe you can come up with an example just to get a better understanding. Your comfort zone is very different to mine and so on. So
correct. Yeah. That's a difficult question because I think it's very individual. As you say, yours is different to mine. So I can't tell you what to do, but I think just going back to what I've already said is be honest with yourself. Is the goal you've set something that you can achieve? That doesn't mean there won't be lots of curveballs on the way. It doesn't mean that it's going to be plain sailing to achieve that difficult goal. the goal doesn't, I'm not talking sporting here necessarily. I'm talking anything in life. I mean, it might be a flippant personal relationship goal that you have that you're not sure if you can achieve. And just the way I'm not a professional in this, I suppose, but what I preach and what I live by is just to set it. I go say, right, that's what I really want to achieve. And then I think, but hang on, if I go one step beyond that, and then generally you go, oh, no, there's no way I can get that right. And that's the feeling I'm looking for. Then I go, hang on, Ryan, you preach this stuff around the world, mate. Let's have a little internal look here. Why don't you think you can get that? And do you really want it? So it's pointless setting a goal you don't think you can achieve if you don't really want to achieve it. And again, that's where the honesty comes in, because it's very easy to fool yourself that you don't really want it. But if you got it, you'd be like, yeah, I really do want it. So it's about being honest with yourself. And again, that's a whole nother discussion, because being honest with yourself is also exceptionally difficult.
Why do you chase these things? Like, what is it that drives you to get out of your comfort zone and and grow as an individual so much? Like, what is it inside of you that makes you want to do that?
Well, the word you used is grow as an individual. So for the first part of my life, certainly plenty growth in many areas. But I sold myself short, and I can guarantee you that 95% of everyone listening and the population of the world sell themselves short. They don't know what they can really achieve, because you've got this unbelievably powerful mind. Now, I didn't really understand this. You all know it because you read it in books and you hear inspirational speakers. But when you actually identified, or it's made apparent to you in the real world, and it happened to me through my swimming adventures in some really scary places, where you realize how powerful the human mind is. It's as I say in my keynotes, the human mind is the gateway to absolute greatness. It really is. It's like it's an incredible thing. And no one pushes back when I say that, but I get a bit of pushback when I say that this human mind, the gateway to absolute greatness that we all have, is actually our biggest limitation. It has evolved to keep you safe. It works exceptionally hard and exceptionally powerfully, subconsciously, to keep you in your lane, to keep you inside your comfort zone, because that's where you will deliver performance. You'll get by. Everyone will be happy with you. You'll be happy with yourself. You'll have a roof over your head and food on the table, kids at school. It's getting on the other side of that line is where the real growth will happen. Okay, not everybody wants that. I think everyone does want that. Actually, let me retract. But you don't necessarily want that in every area of your life. I love being comfortable. If you want to make a cup of coffee, just want a cup of coffee. I don't want to do like this most amazing cup of coffee ever. You just, get it done. Comfort zone stuff. But what I learned is this defense mechanism, this mind of ours keeping us safe. It's great for the survival of the human species, but there's a horrible side effect, and that is it is keeping us safe from the emotional pain that comes from failure. So when you fail, there's consequence, humiliation, embarrassment, all those wonderful things that come together. No one wants it, and we've got this power tool making sure that doesn't happen. So it's much easier just to stay in your lane. And that's exactly what the human mind is designed to do. It's designed to make you believe in your own limitations, because when you believe in them, you don't have any reason to challenge them. Now, to answer your question, I figured this out through a long journey of exposure to extreme cold water, first pushing my own boundaries, and eventually boundaries that possibly, arguably, shouldn't have been possible. And it just gave me a classroom that I never had before until the age of 30 years old, that I realized a classroom, and I say a classroom for me, I'm not trying to get anyone into the cold water, this whole cold immersion thing that's taken off, that's whatever. I am challenging everyone to look around in your own life. What is your classroom? What scares you? I don't like the cold, by the way. Everyone thinks every time it gets cold, hey, Ryan, you must be loving it. It's freezing. I'm like, no, I'm human. Humans haven't evolved well for the cold. We've evolved to avoid it, and I'm exactly the same. But it teaches me such unbelievable lessons. And the joy in the growth. I used to be, and there's nothing wrong with this, by the way. I was a very successful salesman. I'm still a salesman, running an advertising sales business, had my desk, had my clients, had my financial goals. And that's where I saw life right up until retirement. Now, just through this journey and through the lessons I've learned, I travel the world telling stories across literally from Karachi to Australia to Istanbul to right across the States to all over South Africa. And although that's a lot of air miles, it's hugely rewarding because I get to see the world. I get to see all the different cultures and mindsets and living standards. And I get to see which messages I put across appeal more to certain sectors and less to others. And the main learning there is that the core messaging, the core human mind, the desire to get outside your comfort zone when you realize actually you're not getting outside your comfort zone is universal. Doesn't matter where you are in the world, what your standard is. Everybody is fascinated by that and inspired by stories around that.
Do you think do you think people think getting outside of your comfort zone would lead to happiness or lead to living a happier life? Like, why is it that we want it? And that it's so universal.
Well, it's that word growth. You've only got one life.
Yeah.
Okay. Are you happy where you are doing what you are? Maybe you are. A lot of people are, as I said. So let me give you the definition that I came up with of a comfort zone many years ago. So comfort zone is the behavioral state in which a person operates in an anxiety-neutral condition using a limited set of behaviors to deliver a steady level of performance without the element of risk. Now, we're all very happy delivering steady performance, getting by, hitting our number, keeping our bosses happy, keeping ourselves happy, giving nice steady performance without the element of risk, so there's not too much stress. That's quite a healthy place to be, but there's no growth there. There's no growth. If you're doing the same thing to get by and you're not pushing yourself, you're not going to grow as an individual. And once you understand how cool it is to grow as an individual, even if it's just bite-sized chunks like it has been for me, slowly. It's not like wake up one day and have an epiphany. It's just like, hang on, what happened there? I've been doubting myself in that area. Let's try this. And wow, I didn't think I could do that either. Look at me. And then you start getting, attention from other areas and patting you on the back, and you kind of look around and you go, well, huh? Okay, people are noticing. Maybe I've done something cool, and that drives me as well to try something even more cool. I honestly go back to growth as the driving force. If you're very happy in your comfort zone, you've got your family, and you don't particularly want to shoot the lights out,
feel nothing's
generally
missing.
when you've done 10 years of the same,
Yeah.
the human mind starts saying, well,
A little bit bored now.
what's the change? And you can change to another comfort zone, or you can say, hang on, let's take what I really know and I'm really good at because I've been 10 years nice in this delivering steady performance here, and let's set a goal that's ridiculous.
How do you have any advice for people on when it comes to like actually setting goals? Like where would they start when it comes to that? Like
difficult to say.
Is there no framework that you could
find out what you really want, what would make you happy inside?
Yeah.
If that's lots of money, maybe that's a starting point. It's about honesty with your own abilities and with with whether you believe you are getting outside your comfort zone. I think it's actually sitting down and having a look at what, and I'm going to diversify just a little bit. I got to a point in my life probably about 4 or 5 years ago where things had taken off so hectically that I'd taken on too much, and it was just this blur of activity, and I'm being pulled in every single direction, and also trying to work, make a living, have a kid, be a family guy, plus push myself to the brink of extinction in the cold water and all of this. And I got to a place where it was absolutely impossible for me to do it all. And I actually went on the advice, I went and saw somebody, and it was like a psychologist. I suppose he was just a psychologist, but I think like at the Sports Science Institute there. It's really good. And he said, right, well, let's map it out. Let's like take your entire life, and we start at like, let's list on the one side of an Excel spreadsheet every single hour of the day. So from 1 a.m., 2 a.m., 3 a.m., all the way through, 24 hours around. Let's list on the other side everything that you do and everything that you want to do. And then let's put a value. How much time do you want to spend swimming, training? How much time do you want to spend with your son? How much time do you want to spend with your family? How much time? Boom, boom, boom. So put a desired amount of time in a week or in a day, whatever it is. And then literally I charted this out. It doesn't mean you're going to follow a chart on how your life works. But once you got it all in front of you, you can then start to see, well, actually, there's a lot of free time. I've just got to maybe, not try and do that every day, just do that every second day, because I'll still hit my goal and shift, what I'm saying. So it's the short end of this story is to map it all out if you feel overwhelmed. Now we're talking about goals. And I honestly think that that's probably a way to do it as well, in some form of create. I'm a visual guy. Sometimes I get stuck in my own head. But when I actually, my partner Lee always says, like, I love me a spreadsheet. And I really do. So every time I have a challenge, I get an Excel spreadsheet out and I start plotting it all. I do a lot of international talks. And, sometimes, it's a smaller talk. And then you get one in Arizona, and then you got one in Minnesota, and you got one in Las Vegas. And you're going to be away from home for a long time. You're going to have to stay in hotels. So I map it all out and figure out right, I'm going to earn that. I'm probably going to spend that. I'm going to miss my family there. They're the opportunity costs. And I have a look and go, yeah, it's a sweet deal. It's worth it. Or no, actually, no. Yeah. I will chop the Las Vegas talk and I'll just do this one, whatever.
Okay. So map it out.
Yeah. Map it out.
Yeah. I want to come back to swimming. So what is the hardest swim you've ever done?
The hardest swim I ever done. So just to caveat that, there always seems to be a caveat with me. So the swimming genres are so incredibly different. You get extreme cold, where one of the kind of ones I talk about a lot is I did a mile in Antarctica in my Speedo in water temperature that was -1 degree Celsius. So actually salt water freezes below, versus something like an English Channel, which wasn't my hardest, but an English Channel, which it's 34 kilometers as the crow flies, but you end up swimming a lot further than that, which is long and cold, not intensely cold, but it's long, cold, hard, subjected to weather, subjected to stingers, subjected to massive ships, subjected to pollution and all of that. So whereas the Antarctica one was 32 minutes of absolute intense trying to stay alive and get it done and push past what anyone else had ever done. Whereas English Channel, lots of people had done, but I had going to be in the water for, in my case, 13 hours of solid swimming with the weather that didn't play ball and all of that kind of thing. So those are the two extremes that I highlight. Yet some of my most difficult swims are right here, like Robben Island. I've now done Robben Island 142 times, right? So up until quite recently, I was the guy who'd done it the most. I've recently been overtaken.
Who's got the most now?
A guy called Howard Warrington.
How much more has he done?
I think he's now in the 200s.
Are you guys competing like under the?
No, there was, when the takeover was kind of happening, there's firstly it costs me about $3,500-4 grand every time I do a Robben Island. And Howard very cleverly has his own boat and his wife, who's a skipper and officiator, so she can actually make it official, and clearly has a lot more time on his hands than me. So he was literally racking 3, 4, 5 up a week sometimes. And I was sitting in the background going, well, you know what? I've never wanted to, that's never been an interest of mine to compete on a Robben Island numbers. But it's quite nice being the guy who's got the most. So when someone's overtaking you, it does ping a little bit. So maybe there wasn't a couple of months of. But what was I saying now? Oh, my most difficult swim. Yeah. I wanted to. There's a swim from once I started doing these Robben Islands and getting into swimming. You start to have a look around. What are all the records? Who's done what? Where can I push myself? And one of the swims, there are a couple of routes you can do from Robben Island. Robben Island to Blouberg is the shortest and the most common. It's 7.3 Ks. Then you can also swim to 3 Anchor Bay, which is an 11-kilometer swim. So it's quite a lot further, and it's across a shipping lane, etc. At the time, I don't think, I did my homework, and this probably can be disputed, but I've never come across any reason to dispute it. But no one on their first attempt from Robben Island to 3 Anchor Bay had done it in sub 3 hours. And I really wanted to be that guy. And I trained really hard, and I thought I was nice and fit, and I'd done the maths, and I was going to do my best to get across in sub 3 hours. And I also read all the books, and there was a current that comes every now and then that they had called Cutler's Current, because a guy called Barry Cutler had done the swim once, and he's kind of an average speed swimmer, and he did it in a really good time. So everyone was like, wow, we'll name the current after you, Cutler's Current. So I was determined to find Cutler's Current. So I went and got Barry Cutler himself to be on the boat with me and to like help me find this current. And I had this mindset of really pushing hard. And the way you do it, you start, and then I do a solid hour of swimming as hard as I can without any stops. On the hour, I stop quickly just to get some hydration, and then I need them to shout out the GPS, and I need to, hopefully in the first hour I've clocked 4 kilometers, because then I know I'm on track. And I'll never forget that swim. Heading off, the water was a little colder than normal, thinking I must be in Cutler's Current, pushing as hard as I can, and I'm swimming an hour, sticking my head up and thinking, please tell me, because I'd never watched in those days, it was GPS on the boat, please tell me I've done my 4Ks. They said, Ryan, I don't know how to tell you this, but you've done 1.8 kilometers. And it is so mentally brutal when you've pushed so hard and you've still got so far to go, to be told that you are in exactly the opposite of Cutler's Current. You're in a current that's coming the opposite direction and holding you back. So what do? It's the discipline of swimming, especially in cold water and especially distance in cold water, is immensely mental. The cold, as I said, it makes you negative. It makes you look for reasons why you want to get out. You're uncomfortable. It starts shivering. Everything is cramping up. It's horrible. Now I've still got 9 kilometers of swimming. So, the island still looks like it's right behind me. Mentally, that was probably the toughest swim, because it eventually took me 5 hours and 24 minutes to do the swim that I thought I would get done in
3 hours.
In just sub 3 hours.
Yeah.
And although that might not sound like a devastating difference when you're in cold water and it's, the evening's coming, it's starting to get dark, and you've been swimming for 5 hours and 24 minutes. And eventually they had to take me deep out to sea and bring me in. I came in kind of by Sea Point Pool there, for those who know the geography, way past 3 Anchor Bay. Anyway, that doesn't have to be a big ass English channel to be your most difficult swim. It can be something a lot smaller, but your mindset, your expectations, where you've calibrated, is not where the swim takes you. To change that within the element of cold makes things very hard.
So that would be your mentally most challenging swim.
One of them. I've got a list of hundreds and hundreds of swims. So
read the book, and
that's the first. That goes up to 2014. There's a lot more that comes after that. I've got lots of swims. So I can talk all day about challenging swims, but that one stands out.
And in terms of physical swims, like you mentioned, you did the -1 degree in where was that in
Antarctica?
Is that in Antarctica? Like what kind of impact does that have on your body when you're swimming in waters that cold? Like how do they revive you? How do you stay alive? Like, what does the process look like there?
Yeah, so a group of us had spent a lot of time working our way up to be able to take on something that dangerous. And through that process, we had done a lot of our own kind of informal research on what works best for our recovery process. And there are a couple of interesting stories around that. So we know one of the things is, remembering, I'm saying this many times through this podcast, what we do is exceptionally mental. It requires real mental preparation and grit. And one of the things that we preach to ourselves is that your swim is not over until you turn the corner. Now, just to elaborate on that a little bit, what it means is the swim isn't over when you get out of the water. The most dangerous part of any extreme cold swim is not while you're swimming necessarily. It is actually when you get out. And the reason for that is, while you are swimming, all your blood has left your extremities, as I explained, and sitting into your center core to keep your heart pumping. When you finish that swim, there's a phenomenon known as the afterdrop. And that is all that warm blood sitting in your center core, keeping your heart pumping, starts to go back to your extremities, because they're now starving for blood. And because your extremities are freezing cold, that warm blood rapidly cools, and then it naturally circulates back to your center core, which means your center core drops after the swim, hence the term afterdrop. And that is exceptionally dangerous. If you come out of the water and you're not shivering pretty quickly, the longer you're not shivering, that's kind of your body sitting in limbo, wondering which way it's going to go. And there's not a lot you can do in that process. The medics are generally very nervous about that and have got their own ways of dealing with it. But we developed methods that work for us. So long answer again to your question. We then had a team. We set up our recovery facility before we swim. We make sure, because when you come out of a swim like that Antarctica one, you can't even talk. Your mouth is so frozen, your lips are absolutely frozen. You are a little bit confused, as you are hypothermic essentially. And so those who are helping you, you can't wait until after the swim to give them instructions. They have to know exactly what to do before. Even if they're medical doctors, because generally what doctors do is they want to lay you down flat and they want to put a space blanket over you and they've got their own things. And I don't diss it, but that's not how we operate. We remain seated and we have a very set way of doing it. And there's a time that we go without showering, and then eventually we go to showers, and the water temperature kind of gets incrementally increased slowly and over a period. So that is how I prepare for the recovery process. It is not just have a swim and let's see if we can survive afterwards. And I'm talking more extreme cases here. But even like a Robben Island, you need to be prepared. If you do that swim and you don't have someone waiting on the beach with the necessary towel and warm clothes, and
like
someone
that silver towel that you guys wear.
Yeah, that's almost temporary. That's kind of like a space blanket.
Yeah,
right?
space
But there are a couple of golden rules of swimming in the cold. When you get out, firstly, get dry immediately. Get your costume off, because when there is water on you, you can't warm up because that water evaporates and cools you down. So you've got to get dry. You've got to get your wet cozy off, and then you generally try and get in a superheated environment. For me, in the beginning, it used to be like almost a makeshift sauna, and it would take me a day to recover. Now I literally, like the other day, I did a swim from Robben Island, a nighttime swim with Big Bay Events, and I literally got to the beach at 7:00. So we swam in the dark, and I had my work clothes there in my car, ran to the car, had a quick shower at the clubhouse, put on my stuff and went to Joburg. I was on a flight by 9:30, still sitting on the plane shivering. So I've kind of figured out, what I need to do, but that takes quite a lot of experience before you understand your body and your mind and what's happening. It can be quite disconcerting.
Is there any advice you have for people like to train themselves for the cold? Is there any process you can follow, or is it more just incrementally increase the cold exposure that you put your body into? Like, is there anything you do ice baths? Do you do any stuff like that?
Yeah, I do ice baths, but only when I've got a really cold challenge coming. Ice baths are just damn horrible. Right? I don't like them, but they form a very important part of the training. So if I'm talking to somebody who wants to do a Robben Island and they've never swum in cold before, definitely expose yourself to the cold. But for example, when I went to do swims in Russia, besides doing the actual physical training, you need to be mentally strong. So I focus long before I get there, and long before I get in the water, I focus on the impact. I focus in my head on the pain, which I know because I've been in the cold before, so I know what I'm going to feel. And I focus on the fear. I focus internally on how I'm going to handle that fear. And maybe this is more extreme than the average person's going to want to do, but it is absolutely applicable to a Robben Island swim or anything else. And that is just to have it in your mind going in. Don't push it to the back of your mind and just hope you're going to be okay. Get into that let's just use Robben Island as the standard. Get into that water and say, right, I am going to feel terrible. And generally what happens, you feel fine, you feel cold when you get in and all that pain and all that stuff happens. And then 10 minutes later, you feel absolutely fine because, your body's kind of accustomed to it. You swim your first hour wondering what the big fuss was about. And then all of a sudden that cold starts to creep in. And what I say to the many, many people that I've helped across Robben Island is the first second that you actually put your head up and go, okay, I need to get out, I'm getting cold. That's when your swim starts. That's when your swim starts. So mentally know it, because generally you're an hour, maybe an hour and a half into your swim. Now you don't have 2.5 hours to get to the beach. You've only got another hour. And you need to know this is the point that people pull out, because this is what makes Robben Island a difficult swim if you're not in a wetsuit, obviously. Okay, and that's the mental game, that's the mental strategy that I recommend. Be ready for it, be prepared for it, embrace it, and know that it's coming. Don't be taken by surprise.
Yeah. Talking about fear, so got a couple of questions here on that topic. I would say first off, like, what is the scariest swim you've ever done?
Oh, okay.
Are you ever afraid? Like when you?
Hell yeah.
Okay.
Oh man, yeah. I'm afraid often. I've done some really scary swims. I think the one that sticks out a lot, and it's a fun story as well, is in Siberia. We were invited to partake in a swimming event in a little place called Tumin, Siberia, and we wanted to initially swim a mile. It's a whole long story, but that would have been
Is it in the book?
Siberia is in this book. Yeah,
Okay,
yeah. Actually, it's a great part of it. And it turned out that living in Cape Town, this was a phenomenon for me. But we got there, and the day we were going to do our kilometer swim in Siberia, it was minus 33 degrees Celsius outside. So it was a temperature that was just brutally frightening. I had no idea that kind of temperature existed. And the thought of taking one of my two gloves off on each hand and one of my two beanies, let alone stripping mostly naked into a Speedo and diving into water that isn't even water, it's just solid ice. They've got to chainsaw it, before your swim to expose the water was brutally frightening. And I didn't predict that. I didn't know what I was getting myself into. And that it was an incredible experience, but I was genuinely very frightened.
Yeah. How do you specifically stop your fear from controlling your actions? Like, is there something you do in your mind, like the place you go to?
Oh, fear is a very, very important part of everyone's process. If there's anyone out there who says they have no fear, they're lying. So that everyone who's doing anything that is scary have to overcome that fear to a place, and it's all about how you channel it. Okay, and again, it takes for me. I'm a thinker, so it takes a lot of thought on. Right, I feel this way. Why do I feel this way? Is it rational? What am I actually scared of? Am I scared of being cold and shivering and that horrible feeling afterwards, or am I scared of something else? And almost like, once again, my spreadsheet scenario, like put it out there and let's like analyze the moving parts. But I have learned to really channel fear in the right direction. And generally what happens is I allow the fear. I don't try and suppress it. I feel it. Feel the feelings is what I always say. Feel it. Don't try and be macho. Don't try and like push it aside. I'm fearful, and generally I'm fearful right up until the day of the swim. And then there's like a zen that just comes over me naturally. It's not even a decision. It's just like right, now I want to get in. Come, it's time. And I don't know if that is just me naturally saying, right, we've had a week or 2 weeks of fear. Now you need to channel it in the next 30 minutes or next 13 hours of your life, whatever that challenge is. And
when you dissect your fear, what are the main reasons you are feeling fear?
It's probably linked to failure. So again, it depends on the nature of the swim. Something like Antarctica, which, very, very realistically, could end in disaster. So I fear that. I'm not a cowboy. I've got a family. I love my son. I don't want to die. But I have this compulsion to try and push that particular limit on that day. So that's a different level. Something like, the longer swims like False Bay. I had fear for a long time before that, a long time. And when I unpacked it, it's going to be a big topic of my next book, and it's actually a full keynote that I called it Failing Forward. Now I'm like shifting the name because we've tweaked it a bit to Beyond the Summit. And what am I actually fearing? Is it dying? Is it? And it's generally not. And when I unpack it, quite often it is the fear of failing it, the fear that I'm not quite ready to do it, the fear that I won't keep it together mentally long enough to get to the other side, which is all boils down to a fear of failure. And once you understand that, look, I don't want to I don't want to bore you with tons of details, but it took me 3 years to find the edge of false bay. Now false bay has become a thing, but it wasn't. There were 5 swimmers who did false bay before me, and then there was a 9-year break.
When you say the edge, what do you mean the edge of false bay?
When I say the edge, I'm like standing there in my Speedo ready to take it on.
Okay.
Because that means you're committed and you're taking the first step in. Once you're in the water, your swim has started. If you turn around and walk back out, you've technically failed. So what you generally do if you've got this fear, you don't get to the edge. And I prepared and spoke about false bay ad nauseum, but I wanted to do it in the opposite direction. So no one had ever gone from west to east because it was against conventional wisdom, and it was there had been one attempt which was a failure, and 5 people out of about 30 attempts had ever made it the other way, which is kind of the flow of the water. And I was quite determined that I wanted to be the first to do it in the other direction. And along with Derek Fraser, we kind of did the maths and figured out that if we get the weather aligned, we got a good chance. But I was nervous because you had the whole swimming fraternity saying, you're doing it the wrong way. You're either going to look like an idiot because you did it the way everyone said don't do it, or you're going to look really good. Yeah. And I had 3 years before, this might be a stretch for the audience, but 3 years before I had failed at a swim I tried to swim from Ireland to Scotland in the North Channel, and I got something called SIPE, which is swimming-induced pulmonary edema, and it put me in hospital and very, very nearly died that day. And it rocked my confidence big time. And being a red-blooded South African male, instead of coming out of hospital and going like, right, let's unpack that and figure it out, I was so embarrassed that all I did was set the bigger goal, and I shoved that all neatly under the carpet and came up with every excuse under the sun why that wasn't my fault. And I never managed that failure, that shortcoming. And I didn't realize how that was impacting me mentally while I was now preparing for this false space swim. And the fear of failing again, the fear of that SIPE happening again and me dying, the fear of humiliation for doing it the way no one says you should do it, overtook me for a long time. And then I had an epiphany, thanks to my sister Jill, who helped me with that. And within a week or so, I found myself giving it a go, just overcoming that fear and going, you know what, now it is what it is.
So fear of failure, though, because that's a very internal thing. Like, because I could imagine I'm afraid to fail, of course, because I'm afraid of what other people will think if I fail.
Yeah.
But are you just afraid to like let yourself down? Like, is it an internal thing, or is it an external?
Internal. Yeah, good question. I think a lot of it is external.
Yeah.
You have to admit to that. I mean, it was, and sometimes you can channel that in the right way. I tell a lot about my English Channel swim. There was a point where I, honestly didn't think I was going to make it because the weather had turned something horrible. And if it wasn't for the loss of face in amongst all the people I had told, all the people who were watching me do the swim, so it played a big role in pushing me just that much harder. But on the bigger percentage of what drives me is very much internal. I've never been competitive. I say that, but I've never wanted to be first. I must be better than my mate. I must be Foster. That's just not me. I like pushing myself. I like finding challenges that I don't think I can do, figuring out how to get there. And then going a little bit faster or further or colder than what I've done before. Even if someone else has done it before, I don't mind, although I do like doing things for the first time. So I would say I definitely am susceptible to, I don't want to look like an idiot, but internally is way more for me.
I have to ask this. It's on the topic of fear, and I feel like if I don't ask this question, the audience is going to be a bit annoyed. But how do you deal with the thought and fear of sharks, great white sharks, for example, if you're here in South Africa? Like, do you think about them? Is that something even important to you? Like,
hell yeah. Okay. It is extremely important, and it weighs extremely heavily. That said, I've always believed, because a lot of people ask me that, and I managed to push that fear to the back of my head. And I always think I've overcome it. Well, I don't think I've overcome it. I always think I'm in a nice space until you're cruising along and swimming and you're in your zone and suddenly your hand hits a piece of seaweed, or a seal or a dolphin darts underneath you, oh man, and the kind of fright that goes through your body and your mind is quite brutal. So you know that fear is always there, sitting just below the surface. So it never goes away for me, and I don't think it goes away for anyone, any swimmer, no matter how tough they are. And I swim with the toughest of the tough. We all cack ourselves for sharks and what's lurking below. However, there's a decision you need to make as a swimmer. If you want to do an English Channel, not that that's a problem, but if you want to do a full space swim here in South Africa or Robben Island or anything in our waters, you need to understand the odds. You need to understand the nature of sharks, what they look for, what they don't look for. And once you do kind of the mental maths, you'll realize your odds of anything negative happening that involves a shark is exceptionally low. And then you make a decision, right, I am prepared to take it on because of those odds. So, you know what? Let's not let that be something that impacts your swim. Worry about the cold and the distance and the weather and the things that sting you rather than the sharks, because the chances of you being impacted by a shark are like close to zero.
And what about this whole rabies outbreak with seals? Is that a thing at the moment?
That's a thing. Yeah,
Have you got injections?
I haven't, but I think I'm going to go for the vax because I swim a lot and I see a lot of seals. And at first, seals are seals. Like 50% of my swims, I'm accompanied by seals. Now all of a sudden a seal comes and I want to cop stump the thing. It's like, get away, because they always play with you. And they swim around you and they dive over you and they do their thing. So that definitely impacts. Okay. Far more worried about seals than I am sharks right now.
Yeah, right now, sure. Okay, so you've been through some insane challenges mentally, physically, and emotionally. And now you take those lessons and share them with others as a speaker. How did that transition go from, to speaking?
Again, something not planned. I was running my advertising business. My sister Jill used to work with me. And, in the background, I was doing these swims. So I used to take leave and go and do a swim. And no one knew about them. Maybe the odd radio station would pick up on it or whatever. But it's very much a personal thing and below the radar. And then I would go to an advertising conference, for example. And I'd be sitting next to my sister and the inspirational speaker will come on stage and they'll do a whole talk and I'd be like, wow, and standing ovation and like, wow, look at that. And my sister would elbow me and go like, Ryan, you do realize that what you've done is way more interesting than what that person's just spoken about. And I just didn't see it for a long time. And she used to tell me that I'm smoking my socks. Long story short, she eventually sat me down and we had a 3-hour drive together, and she whittled me down and said, right, this is how it could look. Because she's in branding and influencer marketing. And she said, I'll handle your brand, what you look like, and your website and your whatever. You come up with a story. You draw the links to the corporates. You do that kind of stuff and build in the messaging. And then let's see if we can get us a gig. Which obviously, I can't tell you. This is almost like as ridiculous as someone saying, do your first Robben Island swim. So, I'm a salesman. That's what I do. Anyway, long story short, we went to that same sales conference that we had been to. I went to the CEO, a guy called Mark Keating of Sales Guru. Brilliant organization. And I said to Mark, who I'd met via, but I said, look, I sit through all your conferences. I'm in advertising, but I also do the swimming stuff. How about using me as your inspirational speaker at the next conference? Now, that was me overcoming a massive amount of fear to start. And to my absolute horror, Mark said, yeah, okay, we'll hire you for Joburg, Durban, and Cape Town, like in consecutive days. And I had, this was, we had a good couple of months before those dates started. I didn't have a keynote. I hadn't even done the Antarctica swim yet, so I really didn't know what I was going to talk about. Long story short, I put it together. And it's a very unconventional talk. And I stood up in front of 550 people in the Barnyard Theatre with a little thing strapped to my cheek. And Mark Keating sitting next to me panicking because he knew I was panicking. And he shoved me out on stage. And I just, again, exactly the same as my swims. I think I've probably had more fear in the week building up to standing in front of those people. But the day I was at the conference, everything just zenned because I just know, here you are, Ryan. If you go up on stage and you're shaky, you're in trouble, and your mind goes blank. And so I literally just said, it's your story, just tell it. And I told it, and I had 550 people standing ovation, which was incredible feeling and very, very surprising to me. And literally that one talk, which then went to Durban and then to Cape Town with similar responses. When I say that one talk, that one series of talk with Mark Keating, sales guru, set me on the roadmap because, probably in total we addressed 1,000 people, and at least 20 of those worked for different companies, said, we want to get this guy as a speaker. And all of a sudden I'm getting speaking gigs and people are offering me money for them, and I had to figure all of that out. And so it started what was initially just a really nice hobby and a bit of pocket money.
Yeah. So did you initially get a lot of interest from overseas companies, or was it mostly just local in the beginning?
100% local.
Is it?
Yeah. Very, very, very hard to ping on the international stage unless you immediately connected somewhere.
Is it like a word of mouth thing, or like how do companies approach you? Do you approach them?
You're talking international or local?
Well,
or
let's
everything?
start with local.
Starting with local, listen, any inspirational speaker who thinks they can sit back and wait for the phone to ring, it's just not going to happen unless you have done something incredible, and you've been on carte blanche and everyone wants you. You're going to have a couple of months of joy. So what happened? Obviously, Mark Keating's Sales Guru events set me up, and then I am very good at networking and creating the next thing. So if I do a talk for a company, I don't say thanks very much, here's my invoice, and leave. I'll sit with, and I'm also lucky that the keynotes I give are really impactful and really enjoyable generally. And I'm not trying to blow my own tune here, but it sets me on a nice pedestal to go to the MD or the CEO, whoever was senior in there, and say, look, how about working with the rest of your company? I don't just keynote, I also can work with your sales teams and do X, Y, and Z. Or how about, you guys are linked to that business over there. Do you know that MD? Won't you just drop him a mail and give me a reference? And if you sit back and wait for it to happen, it doesn't happen. So I literally started doing that. And then initially I was doing exceptionally well. And that because I was the new kid on the block and everyone was talking, that's an exaggeration, but you know what I mean? People were talking about me and I was getting gigs. Then all of a sudden you find yourself like in the mainstream middle tier speaker in general, and you've just got to, there are a lot of speakers out there. And the booking started to tail off, and you have to like really start analyzing like what's happening. Because up until this point, you suddenly start making really good money. So you think, hang on, need to take this seriously. So it's networking and it's word of mouth and it's about delivering. And then there are a million other tricks that you got to play.
And when it comes to going international, like how did you go from, landing local gigs to overseas gigs?
It is hard. But for me, what happened was I gave a talk in Cape Town at the Vineyard Hotel, which was the Cape Town office of a multinational. Mm-hmm. And the CEO happens to be there, who I was connected with before. And this was a small gig, I think like 20 people in the room. And they were doing kind of an exco. So he had brought a lot of his international bigwigs into that room. So I was talking to a very senior room. And a good couple of them said, wow, we want you to come and dress our teams in London, and we want you to dress our team. And then they hired me for that same company hired me for a massive cyber resilience conference in Dallas, Texas. And there's I'll write it in my next book. There's some wonderful mistakes I made around that. But that connected me internationally. And now all of a sudden you've got on your CV, Ryan Stramrood, international speaker. Now it's true. And then it's just a matter of using your different contacts and people and just networking the hell out of it. But I've had to be a lot more clever and smart and strategic than that. It's not just word of mouth. It's not just networking. It's also what you deliver and how you interpret your message, how you convince, for example, the Americas that your message is going to be relevant. An ice swimmer, like how on earth can he teach my sales team how to do better? It's one of those. And you also got to cut through, which I'm still very much busy with, cut through the clutter. There are a lot of inspirational speakers out there, tons who are in America and are in London or in the UAE. So what I've also done now is I've made myself quite a power. It's almost like anyone who watches rugby, the rugby analysis, kind of the bench, the bomb squad. I've positioned myself as kind of a mini bomb squad within these massive, they're big corporations that do corporate training and executive training. So they'll have a whole kind of 3-day program for their people. And I try and sell myself into that program to say, hey, give me an hour within your program, and this is what I'll deliver. Because there's no way you're going to deliver the kind of mindset and mental awareness stuff and performance messaging. And it's a wonderful break from the tried and tested, and the guys get to sit back and have a laugh and be wowed. And that's working quite well as well. So, once you company X says, okay, Ryan, we'll use you to be our bomb squad in this particular thing. And then you're talking to 20 execs who are in the training, and they go, well, hang on, you need to connect with our sales team because we want them to hear the story. And so it starts to flow.
Yeah. What's been the most surprising thing about stepping into the world of speaking?
Surprising thing. I think the pricing game, it's an enigma. Back where anyone who's done marketing or consumer psychology 101 will laugh at this. And I actually did that at varsity, so I should have known better. But when I started both locally and when I started getting international traction, and I'm giving some trade secrets away here, so any speakers listening, use this advice, is when I started getting into the Americas, I was looking at the currency conversion and thinking, you know what, I don't have to charge what their speakers charge. I can charge half, convert that into rands, and it still looks like a ridiculous amount of money for an hour's talk. And that's where I positioned myself and thought that it was a good idea. And it turned out to almost be the death of me, because if, for example, I charge $20,000 in the States for a big corporate conference, and I thought it'd be clever to go in at 10,000 because I'm a lot cheaper than everyone else, and but no one wants to hire the cheap guy, at the big conference. Do you want? Because all they look at is the price and say, why is he half the price of that one? He must be terrible, So they just didn't hire me. So I was getting to a point of despair until I figured that out.
So they rejected they contacted you.
Well, yeah, luckily I had an interview with the vice president of one of the big software corporates for their biggest conference, and I was all excited. And I was almost nervous to give my price at 10,000 because it still felt like a lot of money, plus flights, plus accommodation. And I gave it with a lump in my throat when she asked, like, let's talk Turkey, because she was totally sold on me. We were talking dates and accommodations and messaging and themes. And then she said, right, let's talk price. And I gave her my 50% better than I know the next guy's going to charge. And she almost fell off her chair. She's like, but why so cheap? I was like, well, cheap. Okay. Because currency conversion and blah, blah, blah. And I never got the gig. And it was an eye-opener. And eventually, after hammering her with email, she said, Ryan, it's just, you know what, we can't, you fall in a different category at $10,000. You are entry-level speaker. We need top-end speaker for this event. And I suddenly realized, okay, now my price is $20,000, and now I start to get the gigs. And it doesn't, for the listeners, I don't always get a full fee, and they're not all big corporate conferences. Quite often they're small department things, and I work with businesses. So, yeah, certainly not rolling in my dollars yet.
So what is the lesson there for you? Like, don't undersell yourself.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So the one thing I've learned big time now, and it actually took me way longer than it should, is that what I bring to a conference, the value I bring is way more than they pay me. It really is. And look, there you get different shades of gray. Like, I've just been hired to do a talk for 25 people in Nashville, right? Now that's 25 people. If you start working back the investment per head, and this is more of a workshopy vibe, so I adjust my fee accordingly. But when I'm doing a big conference and there are 500 to 1,000 people in that, they've invested a lot of money to make that a proper, effective, valuable conference. They've got all their list of other speakers, each one very, very strategically selected on different topics, and I'm the one who's delivering that particular segment of messaging. And if I do my job well, which I know I do, I'm going to deliver great value for them. I'm going to play a big role in people going home after the conference saying that was well worth my $1,000 investment to be a delegate at that conference. And it took me a while to figure that out, or to feel it, because I'm telling swimming stories and messaging. You sometimes, and when you're thinking in rands and you're getting paid in dollars, you sometimes feel a little sheepish. But I don't anymore, not in the slightest.
Yeah. For anyone who wants to get into this, what advice would you have for them? How can they get into the speaking game?
Into speaking?
Yeah.
Have a backup plan. Definitely. It's a very, very rewarding way to make a living, but it's a very, very difficult way to get into mainstream. There are a lot of speaking agents out there, and a lot of the big corporates go via the agent. They won't come to you directly and say, hey, Ryan, we've heard you, great, let's book you. They go through an agent and say, this conference is, this is the theme of the conference. Who on your books would you recommend? And the agent then puts 10 names forward, and they choose via those 10 names after seeing each one's bio. So you have to develop a relationship with all the different speaking agents in South Africa and around the world, which I do very badly. I think locally I'm pretty good with the agents, but internationally it's so hard because there are so many speakers out there. And to get this little voice from Cape Town who says, hey, pick me, is very hard. But you've got to work full-time. It's a full-time job, by the way, for all those listening. Full-time. When today is one of my first days off. After this podcast, I'm going to be sitting at my computer, networking, emailing those from the past, looking what opportunities are where I've been before. My trip to the States in the last couple of weeks, I need to start following up and leveraging off that. It's a full-time job. So the advice to somebody starting out is, what's your unique selling point? What's your USP? There are a lot of adventurers out there. That's my space. There are a lot of inspirational and performance kind of people out there. Where do you peg yourself? And you need to be very clear on what you deliver. And it's very hard to find that unique thing that you deliver. And then price yourself where you feel you should be priced. If you want to be doing big conventions, then you can't price yourself as you've got to have a different price structure for that. So I'm sorry to get flustered because there's so much I actually want to say and so much advice I can give. I could write a book on how to get a speaker started and what you should do, and maybe I will do that one day. But you mustn't pigeonhole yourself. Something COVID taught me, and COVID was the worst and the best thing that ever happened to me. I was transitioning into speaking only. And of course, COVID hit. How many speaking gigs do you think were happening? It just died overnight. Boom. All my international stuff and everything just died. Boom. Cancelled. Dun, 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 dun. And then you sit hoping it's going to come back. Anyway, eventually when you realize this COVID isn't going to be a 3-week thing and we're all going to be released, you had to start making some big plans. And one of the things it taught me was never say no to anything. The answer is yes. And then you figure out how to do it. I got a brief this morning for a gig in Australia. And actually, I want to read that email now in terms of what they need the speaker to deliver. It is light years away from what I do. But I know when I have a look at it and I have a look at my stories, I know that I will find links to all their key points that they want to come across. Whereas probably in the early days, I would have looked at it and gone, no way, it's not for me. And it doesn't mean I will get this gig and I won't do anything contrived, because at the end of the day, if I do get it, I've got to go stand in front of the 300 people in Australia and I'm going to be judged heavily on the messaging I put across.
Would you say this is not your comfort zone, like this gig?
Definitely not my comfort zone, but it's becoming something I do often. Let me quickly see, I'll read an extract here because it's one of the last emails. Navigating change and business growth, the power of fusion, customer experience and differentiation, innovation and leadership. Those are the points. Now, there are things there that I can go, okay, well, collaboration and that's easy, and teamwork and all of that. But fusion and this kind of stuff, I'm going to have to think hard. But they're waiting for a reply. And I'm going to go and now sit and work it out. And I'm telling this long story is because the advice is that the answer is never no. I will not go back and say, oh, sorry, no, that's just not for me. I'm going to go and say, hell yeah. I've also got to work out because I've been invited to speak in Pittsburgh on the 20th of whatever month this is. And then their Melbourne talk is on the 24th. So can I deliver in Pittsburgh in the evening, fly out on the 21st to get to Australia, probably by the 23rd to get a good night's sleep to be on stage on the 24th. So you got to work out all these logistics. Once again, Ryan, spreadsheets come into play.
Man, you should also make a template and put that online. I think people find it so valuable.
Yeah.
Just lastly, on the topic of speaking, how big of a role would you say social media plays on like landing gigs? Does more followers equal more opportunities, or is it not such a big deal in this industry?
No, it's definitely a big deal, and it's where I, on some levels, failed dismally. Because I've never really taken it as seriously as my ex-manager would like me to. It depends again. Okay, so from a speaking point of view, directly getting on stage, it does impact, but not so much. It's if you are the sportsman that I am and wanting endorsements and be an influencer in my space, the first thing everyone checks is what's his following. And that impacts greatly. However, I'm almost past that because I'm doing less massive swims in my life and more talking about it and delivery to corporates and value in that sense. Doesn't mean I've stopped swimming, but I've lost my train of thought now.
I suppose you could still use like the old footage that I'm sure you have, and like still repurpose
I've got
it
stories till the day I die.
Yeah.
But I've just lost my train of thought. What we were talking about?
Yeah, we were talking about social media.
Oh, social media.
How much
Yes,
of an influence it
exactly
has.
that.
Yeah.
So, and this is advice to speakers again, and I'm just thinking out loud whether it's relevant to everyone, but choose your platform. Facebook means nothing to me. It's just, not nothing. It means less to me. Instagram is I do stories and it's like just to ping. LinkedIn is massive for me. LinkedIn is massive because I've got tons and tons of followers there and eyeballs there, and
all the big wigs are on
and
LinkedIn.
the big wigs are watching that. And again, advice to speakers is, I've come across a lot of speakers looking at their socials and they're like, oh, please hire me. I'll give you a discount, or this is what I really just need a break. Don't do that. No one wants to hire the poor battling speaker. They want to hire the busy speaker. Now, I'm blessed. It wasn't always the case, but I'm blessed that I am busy. So I only post what I'm doing, and it makes me look busy. But like during COVID and these periods which were dead, you had to come up with stuff to say, hey, I'm still current. I'm still here. This is what I can do. This is, it's a great medium to show people that you are still out there and involved and active. And human nature is, well, if he's delivering for all these other people, I better have a look what he can deliver for me.
Yeah. Okay.
Opposed to you never see him, or all he does is beg for work. So it doesn't work.
Okay, just in closing, what I tend to do is on my Instagram, I put out a story and ask let my followers know who my next guest is going to be. And in this case, it was you. And I asked them, do they have any questions for you? Like if they were sitting where I am now, what questions they would ask you.
Ooh, okay.
So just quick fire. You don't have to go too deep into each one.
Right.
And the first one, what do you think about when you swim?
A million different things. If it's a short, intense swim like the Antarctica one, which is just a mile, I don't think about anything other than survival. If it's a 13-hour swim like the English Channel, I'm thinking mostly about keeping myself positive and overcoming all the negative thoughts that are coming in my head. And that, believe it or not, keeps me very busy.
Okay. Number 2, do you ever get into normal water temperatures and think, wow, this is boring?
This is boring. Actually, yes, I don't like swimming in, a lot of people love the water. I've just done gigs and spent some time in Puerto Rico where the water is lovely, 28 degrees. And I swim in it, I just get too hot. And I don't feel refreshed when I come out, but it is a lot easier to get in, let's be honest.
Okay. Number 3, what's the weirdest thing you've ever seen or encountered while in the water?
Oh, wow. I saw something exceptionally weird. I was trying to swim from Russia to the USA in the Bering Strait, and it was dark and windy and scary, and the water was 2 degrees Celsius. And I was looking down into the depth, and there were just these 2 eyes looking up at me in a weird structure of something. And quite often I try not to look down because I kind of look forward. I don't want to see what's in the deep. But when I'm really struck with fear, then I try and embrace it. So I take a deep breath and I look down deep back into the eyes of whatever it was and try and identify it and demystify it. But I never demystified that. And I've wondered all these years what the hell it was.
So you saw eyes looking back up.
There was, shape down. And I thought, ooh, what's that swimming down there? And then suddenly there were these two eyes looking up at me. But the eyes weren't like on either side of the head like you'd expect on a fish or a shark. They were like in front. And listen, maybe it was an overactive imagination, but I kind of know what I saw. No one else saw it because we were doing a relay, so there were lots of other swims. But yeah, that's still the weirdest. And that was like in the most remote part of the world you could possibly get, in the Yakutian region of Russia.
Yeah, who knows what's swimming over there. Number 4, if you had to choose one extreme swim that no one should ever attempt, which would it be and why?
Wow, interesting swim. Interesting question, rather, that no one should ever attempt. Wow, I don't have an answer for that. I can only probably draw from my list of swims that I have attempted. I don't actually have an answer. I think, what I will say is, and because it stands out frightening for me, was that Siberia swim. If you're going to do a swim, even if it's in a controlled environment, do your homework on what the ambient temperature can drop to, because that makes a massive difference. In our case, minus 33. Now you're breathing in minus 33 before you get into the 0.3 degree water.
Yeah.
I wouldn't recommend anyone does that. Okay. It's horrible, but you know what? It was part of my journey, so I do feel a little weird telling people not to do it, but there was very little enjoyment there.
If you think of any extreme swim that you've thought about, like, has anything come to your mind where you're like, no, that's way just too dangerous, I can't do that?
Quite a few, and those are the ones that I usually stop and lie awake at night and say, but hang on,
I do it?
Let's unpack that. Why? Yeah. What's too dangerous about it? What are the odds of whatever that danger is happening? Let's talk to the support crew and get other people's opinions. And I do a lot of homework around it and due diligence. And there are a lot of swims that I really haven't got a lot of support for, but I've ended up doing quite comfortably. That said, often there's luck. There's strategy and luck. So you've got to choose the right day and the right team and do the right prep. And if it all aligns for you on that day, you get across quite easily. And what was all the fuss about? If one thing goes wrong, it might be a very different picture. So it's a difficult, it's a risk you have to take if the goal of doing whatever it is rewarding enough to you. And you've got to evaluate whether that risk is worth it.
Okay. Ryan, thank you so much for joining me and taking the time to talk with me and sharing your story, your mindset. I really appreciate it, man. And I'm going to re-listen to this many times and take as much of your mindset on board. And thank you.
Such an absolute pleasure. Next time we'll tell more swimming stories, because there's some really, really cool, fun stuff that you can extract from. But in my Push Past Impossible book, there's a whole bunch. I'm getting a lot of pressure to write the next book, which is all in my head. It's just a matter of getting it done. But thanks for your interest, and thanks to the listeners who enjoyed this podcast.